Every time I die, I enter an alternate reality, and each fresh world is more horrifying than the last. This is likely the only existence you've ever known, but I remember a brighter life. I grew up in a warless version of the 2000s. World hunger was an ancient nightmare, a frightful fable of fictitious proportions. We had solved so many of the world's problems. Life was good. Life was easy. But that all changed for me in 2011. Cycling along a quaint country road, a collision with a distracted driver would wrench me from my beautiful life forever. I was torn from my body. I screamed into a metaphysical abyss as my soul ascended from its mangled corpse on the tarmac. In 2011, at the age of 18, I died. I have no doubt of that. Just as I have no doubt that looming, rotting, curling fingers emerged from the clouds to seize my spiritual form, only to be denied the pleasure as my untethered soul suddenly plummeted back to the ground. I entered oblivion, absolute darkness. And then, "Are you okay?" a man asked. My eyelids were unnaturally weighty and unwilling to open, and when I did finally part them, I found my soul back in its physical body, entangled with my bicycle on the road. My previously mangled body in seemingly pristine condition. I didn't see you. I'm so sorry, but I died, I croaked. The man gulped. "No, you're going to be okay. I've called an ambulance." I felt disjointed, and yet there was not a single scratch on my body. It was disjointedness of a spiritual nature, a sense of not belonging, a sense that I had unknowingly cheated the frightening fingers that were poised to scoop me up from the sky. By the time the ambulance arrived, the driver had unmarried my frozen body from the bicycle wreckage. I could move, but I hadn't. There was too much terror to process. I dreamt it, I thought. I didn't really die and leave my body, don't be stupid. The driver, racked with guilt, followed us to the hospital. He and I seemed equally shocked by not only my survival, but my apparent lack of injuries. After undergoing various physical and psychological checks, I was given the medical all clear, but the driver protested relentlessly. "It was a head-on collision," he said. "The kid flew into the air. You saw the wreckage. His bike is non-existent. Check again. You've missed something. A head injury? Something." One of the doctors attempted to calm him down. "Mr. Dale, I appreciate your concern, but Finn has sustained no injuries. This is a good thing. Nobody's hurt." Meanwhile, I was observing the hospital environment from my bed, with that returning sense of disconnectedness. Things were different. The machinery in the hospital looked less advanced. People's clothes looked dated. But it wasn't until I returned to my family that the horror truly revealed itself. As I stepped into unfamiliar surroundings, I realized that I was not home. "I've made spaghetti for dinner, Finn," Mum said. I nodded slowly, transfixed by the kitchen television. It depicted a horrifying scene of misery and destruction in the Middle East. I thought it to be a film until I saw the news logo at the bottom, and that was when I understood what I was seeing. War. Something I had only ever seen in history books. Something that the world had mostly quashed with the unification of religions and nations in the 1800s. The URN. An event that I would learn had never happened. "Switch on to something jollier, Dave," Mum said, noticing my distress. I immediately ran to my room to research the atrocity that had evoked a nonchalant reaction from my parents. How could they be so unfazed by what I assumed to be the first war in over a century? The surprises didn't cease there. Atop my bedroom desk, there sat a mobile phone which looked like something from the 80s, my version of the 80s. And the internet was far more primitive than I remembered. My palms began to sweat, and that only worsened as I read about the numerous wars that had plagued the world for a century. Thankfully, some strides had been taken in resolving conflicts, and widespread hunger had been eradicated in the late 90s. But the timeline was still wrong. Terribly wrong. And this wasn't even your reality. It took years for me to adjust to a world with so many historical variations. I kept the truth a secret from my family and friends. I feared that I'd be committed to a psychiatric ward if I were to reveal what had happened to me. And maybe I would have agreed. I think I might have eventually chalked it up to a mental health issue if it hadn't been for my second death. December 11th, 2022. I was on a plane that crashed in the English Channel. I died. In the bowels of the ocean, my disembodied spirit sank with the fragments of an aircraft's carcass and numerous ghoulish spectres of deceased passengers. And from the darkened depths of that watery graveyard, I saw familiar fingers reaching towards me, as if greeting an old friend. I feared what that terrifying giant had in store for the soul that had eluded it, cheated it. And those awful appendages seemed angrier this time. But then, yet again, my soul was torn away. I rose through the water and reunited with my body at the surface. I found myself floating at sea, but there was no plane wreckage in sight. Only the cliffs of Dover in the distance, and so I swam towards them. But the world I found upon reaching the shore was even more terrifyingly different from the one I had left years ago. It was your world. Everything has been corrupted here. Senseless death and destruction. A world on the brink of self-inflicted collapse. And nobody cares. The people here are shells. They terrify me. I used to fear the shadowy hand that craved, and still craves, my soul in all universes. Now I fear the deeper level of horror that the next reality brings.